have it. Thank you. We will now move on to the debate on the report of the Joint Committee on the draft Online Safety Bill. And I call Damian Collins to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would just like to start this debate by thanking in particular the members and the clerks of the Joint Committee who put in a tremendous effort to deliver the Joint Committee report in the 11 sitting weeks that we had, receiving over 200 written submissions of evidence, 50 oral evidence witnesses giving evidence, 4 further roundtable meetings being held with outside experts as well as members of both houses. I'm delighted as well to see my colleagues from the Joint Committee, Lord Gilbert and Baroness Kidron, in the gallery. I'd also like to thank my honourable friend, the member for South Croydon, the Minister, and also the Secretary of State for the open and collaborative way they worked with the committee throughout the process, throughout our deliberations, and also to Ofcom, who provided a lot of constructive guidance and advice to the committee as we prepared the report. This feels like a moment that's been a long time coming. There's been a huge amount of interest on all sides of the House in the Online Safety Bill, ever since the publication of the first White Paper in April 2019. There was then 2 further government responses, the publication of the draft bill, and then the process of pre-legislative scrutiny by the Joint Committee. I feel, though, that this process has been worthwhile. I feel that the committee, in producing a unanimous report, reflecting, I think, a wide range of opinions that we received, I think has put forward some strong ideas that will improve the bill when it is introduced for second reading, hopefully later in this session of Parliament. So I believe it's been a process that was worth undertaking. But during this period of time, and the work of many other committees of both House of Lords and Commons at the same time as well, looking at some of these important issues around online safety and the central role that online services play in our lives. The companies, the big tech companies, have had plenty of notice that this is coming. And during this period of time, have we seen a marked improvement? Have we seen the introduction of effective self-regulation? Have the companies set a challenge to Parliament to say, you don't really need to pass this legislation because we're doing all that we can already? No, we have not. If anything, the problems have got worse. In the last year, we saw an armed insurrection in Washington, D.C., where a mob stormed the Capitol building, fuelled by messages of hate and confrontation that have been circulating substantially online. Last summer, we saw the England football team, members of the England football team, be the subjects of vile racist abuse at the end of that match, something that the football authorities warned the companies could happen, and the companies didn't prepare for or act on adequately at the time. And as Rio Ferdinand said when he gave evidence to the Joint Committee, people shouldn't have to put up with this. You can't just put your device down. It's a tool that people use for work, to stay in communication with their family and friends. And you can't walk away from the abuse. If you're abused in a room, you could leave the room. But you can't walk away from a device that may be the first thing you see in the morning and one of the last things you see at night. We've seen increases in abuse of incidents of child abuse online. In fact, the Internet Watch Foundation has produced a report today showing yet again record levels of abusive material related to children, posing a real child safety risk. They've said there's record amounts this year. They said the same thing in their report last year. These issues are getting worse. Throughout the pandemic, we've seen the rise of anti-vaccine conspiracy. I'll give way to Honourable Gentleman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for bringing this forward? Can I just say to this, we've had a colleague in Northern Ireland, Diane Dodds, MLA, the vile abuse that she had was unbelievable towards her and her family. So does the honourable member not agree that there's a huge loophole and gap in this bill, namely that the anonymity clause remains that allowed comments such as those to my colleague and friend Diane Dodds, which were vile, despicable to the extreme, to pass with no redress and no one held accountable through this bill? The veil of anonymity must be lifted and people made to stand over the consequences of what they are brave enough to type but not to say.
Trying to make a speech, is he? No. Damian Collins.
Okay. The Honourable Gentleman raises an important issue. What the committee agreed in the report was there must be an expedited process of transparency so that when people are using anonymity to abuse other people, say things for which they might be sued in public or action taken against them, that it must be much swifter and easier to identify who these people are. And people must know that if they post hate online directed at other people and they commit an offence in doing so, that anonymity will not be a shield that will protect them. They will be identified readily, action will be taken against them. There are cases, of course, where anonymity may be required for people people speaking out against an oppressive regime or a victim of abuse telling their story, but it shouldn't be used as a shield to abuse others. And that is something that we set out in the report, and I think the Honourable Gentleman is right. That's something where the bill needs to move on. The companies themselves, we're not just asking them to moderate content. We're asking them to moderate their systems as well. Their systems play an active role in directing people towards hate and abuse. A study commissioned by Facebook showed that over 60% of people that joined groups that shared extremist content did so at the active recommendation of the platform itself. The Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen, in her evidence to the committee, made clear the active role of systems in promoting and driving content through to people, making them the targets of abuse, making vulnerable people more likely to be confronted with content and directed towards content which will exacerbate their vulnerabilities. Facebook and companies like Facebook may not have invented hate, but they're driving hate and they're making it worse. And it's these systems that they must be responsible for. And it's right that the bill will allow the regulator to hold the companies to account, not just for what they do or don't take down, but for the way they use their systems, which they have created and designed to make money for themselves, by keeping people on their systems longer, and therefore they are responsible for them. And this, I think, is the key thing that is at the heart of the bill and at the heart of the report the Joint Committee has published, that the companies must be held liable for the systems they have created. The committee has recommended a structural change to the bill to make it absolutely clear that what is illegal offline should be regulated online, and existing offences in law should be written into the bill, and it should be demonstrated how the regulator will set the thresholds for enforcement of those measures online. An approach like this has been made possible, I believe, because of the work of the Law Commission in producing its recommendations, particularly introducing new offences around actively promoting self-harm, around promoting content and information that is known to be knowingly false. I think a new measure that will give us the mechanism to deal with malicious deepfake films being targeted at people. These are necessary measures. Also, I think, to make sure that there are guiding principles that the regulator has to work to and the companies have to work to as well, to ensure that there is regard to public health in dealing with dangerous disinformation relating to the pandemic or other public health issues. Also to ensure there's an obligation for the regulator to uphold principles of freedom of expression as well. I believe it is important that the effective action should be taken against hate speech, extremism, illegal content, all harmful content that is within the scope of the bill. But also, if companies are removing content that has every right to be there, where that positive expression of people's opinions has every right to be online, then the regulator should intervene in that direction as well. The regulator should have that power. At the heart of the regime has to be a system where Ofcom, as the independent regulator, can set mandatory codes and standards that we expect the companies to meet, and then to use its powers to investigate and audit the companies to make sure that they are complying. We cannot have a system that is based on self-declared transparency reports by the companies that even they themselves struggle to explain what the results actually mean, and there's no mechanism for actually understanding whether they're giving us the full picture or only a highly partial one. The regulator has to have that power. But crucially, that the codes of practice should set mandatory minimum standards. What we shouldn't have is Silicon Valley deciding what the online safety of citizens in this country should be. It should be determined through legislation passed through this Parliament, empowering a regulator to set those minimum standards and take enforcement action when those systems haven't been met. We also believe that the bill would be improved by removing what has been a controversial area of it, which is the principles in Clause 11, that priority areas of harm are determined by the Secretary of State and are advisory to the companies. I think by basing the regulatory regime and the codes of practice on established offences that this Parliament has already created, that are known and understood and therefore enforced, we can say that they are mandatory, we can say that they are clear, and there's clearly been an approval process of Parliament in creating the offences in the first place. There also needs to be, when new areas of harm are added to the schedules, added to the codes of practice, there should be an affirmative procedure in both houses of Parliament to approve those changes to the code, where members get the chance to vote on whether changes to the codes of practice, the introduction of new offences as a consequence of those offences being created, is included. The committee took a lot of evidence on the question of online fraud and scams. We received evidence from the Work and Pensions Select Committee and the Treasury Select Committee advising this should be done. If a known scam, a known attempt to rip people off and defraud them is present on a website, on a social media platform, be it through advertising or any kind of posting, it should be within scope. It should be up for the regulator to require its removal. There shouldn't be a general blanket exemption for advertising. It actually would create a perverse incentive to more actively promote such content. Yeah.
I'm very grateful, and I thank him for his work on this very important issue. Does he agree, as is referenced in the report, that the platforms must be required to proactively seek out that content and make sure it's genuine, and if not, remove it rather than it being user-generated, prompted removal?
It's absolutely vital that the companies are made to act proactively. This is one of the problems with the current regime, where action against illegal content is only required once it's reported to the companies, and they're not proactively identifying it. So he's absolutely right about that, and with frauds and scams, particularly where the perpetrators are known. And the role of the regulator is to ensure the companies don't run those ads. The advertising authorities can still take action against individual advertisers, as can the police, but there should be a proactive responsibility on behalf of the platforms themselves. Briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, if you allow me just to say one or two more things. In terms of redress, we believe it's really important that there is user redress through the system as well, which is why the committee recommended creating an ombudsman if complaints have been exhausted without successful resolution, but also civil redress through the courts. An individual who has been greatly harmed, or their family has been greatly harmed as a consequence of what they've seen on social media, may take some solace in the fact the regulator has intervened against the company for its failures and levied fines or taken action against individual directors. But as an individual can take a case to the courts for a failure in a company to meet its obligations in data protection law, it should also apply in online safety legislation as well. And that an individual should have the right, maybe on their own or with others, to sue a company for failing to meet its obligations under the Online Safety Act. I would commend the report to the House, and again thank everyone involved in the production of the report for their hard work. This is a bill that we desperately need, and I look forward to seeing it passing through the House in this session.
Thank you. As the